Hello again, my name is Andrew Scowcroft. I run a company called Open Ground, which is a leadership and management training company, and I've been working with the Deanery and other parts of the university for several years, delivering training modules to doctors and other healthcare professionals. In this short video presentation this afternoon, we're going to look at the scourge of many clinicians in the health service, and that is meetings, the number of meetings they have to go to, and the perception that many of those meetings do little else than consume lots of tea and coffee, but get very little done in the way of meaningful decisions. So over the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to explain why meetings go wrong and what you as clinicians, if you're running meetings or if you're attending meetings, what you can do to put that right. So the first thing I need to say about meetings is that meetings aren't bad. It's bad meetings that are bad. And it constantly amazes me, and I've got a long career in the health service before I went self-employed, that almost everybody else in the health service accuses managers of spending all of their time in meetings, as if that is in some way an avoidance of the real world or the real work. And I've become a little feistier in my old age, and I'm starting to suggest that it's simply a question of semantics, it's labels. I could argue that a surgeon spends all his time in theatre. And a theatre session is a meeting. It's a group of people with a common purpose and interest in the same room to do a particular job in the time available to the best of their professional skills. Every A&E consultation is a meeting. Every primary care consultation in the general practice is a meeting. Every visit a district nurse makes to a patient's home is a meeting. It's just that when we use the word meeting as opposed to those other terms, that's when the pejorative interpretation comes in. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Just please bear in mind that meetings themselves aren't bad, but I fully accept that there are some horrendously bad meetings that take place. And up on screen, you'll be able to see now why some meetings go horribly wrong. I won't insult your intelligence by reading out that list. You can see it for yourself, and you'll probably be able to spot meetings that you've been forced to go to or you've organised recently which contain some of those elements. An agenda that went on for ages. The wrong people, too many people, too few people. So what can you do about those things? Well, in this short presentation, I'm going to give you 4 or 5 simple, straightforward, practical, usable tips for improving the meetings that you run and that you go to. And the first tip is decide whether or not you need the meeting in the first place. Seems strange to talk about how to improve meetings by saying, well, actually, you might actually not need to meet. But I come across in the health service, and I used to when I worked in it, so many examples of meetings that are in the diary so they happen. Some of them are even given a label of the day of the week. So I hear practices or clinical departments talking about, well, I'm off to the Tuesday meeting. Well, why are you going to this meeting? Well, it's Tuesday. Well, why do you have the meeting? Well, we have the meeting every Tuesday. And there really is a sense that it's an unstoppable machine. But one of the best gifts that you can give to your colleagues sometimes is to take a judgment that there is not enough business to transact based on the time and the cost of the people being in the room. And sending a note round saying, unless you challenge me, I'm proposing that next Tuesday's meeting doesn't go ahead. We'll still have the next Tuesday in the diary just in case, but we will be bold enough to cancel meetings that don't look as if they're going to achieve anything. So, tip number 1, don't hold meetings just for company. Just don't hold meetings just because they're in the diary and it would be awkward to cancel it. Just remember the last time somebody emailed you the morning before a meeting that you weren't necessarily looking forward to and said, it's been cancelled, you've got the afternoon to do something else. You would have been delighted with that. So why not give other people the same gift, if you like? The second tip is make sure that you clarify and communicate absolute precision as to the purpose of the meeting. And beyond that, to the purpose of each item that is going to be on any agenda for that meeting. I'm astonished and still saddened by the number of meetings I hear about where you had to turn up just to find out exactly what was being talked about. There may have been an agenda sent out beforehand, but all it said was car parking, Christmas, holiday rotas, new department, building works, audit results, phrases like that, meaningless phrases, but somebody thinks that's a good enough agenda, let's send that out for the meeting. Unless you know absolutely what the purpose is of being there, and this is where you clinicians get it right in terms of theatres and district nursing and primary care consultation, you know why you are there. The other people in the room know why they are there. I think we need to translate that clarity and that precision into meeting rooms and boardrooms. Absolute clarity as to why you are there. If you have that clarity, you get a number of benefits even before the meeting has started. The first benefit you get is that people can make an informed decision as to whether they need to be there. So you don't get passengers. You don't get people who've just come in for a warm and a cup of tea. They will excuse themselves if that meeting is not the best use of their time. So in that way, you are more likely to get the people who need to be there at the meeting. The second benefit of communicating that clarity beforehand is that people can do some thinking and some discussing with colleagues before the meeting starts. And as you'll see in a moment when I look at the problems that are caused by agendas, particularly bad agendas, you'll see that if you have to turn up just to find out what the issue was, there's a temptation to say, well, I'll need to discuss that with my colleagues. In which case, that item ends up appearing on that agenda. It's then deferred to the next meeting where the process repeats itself, and you can find meetings which have been discussing and avoiding and deferring the same issues month after month, week after week, year after year, simply because of this lack of clarity as to why the meeting is being held. So before we even get into the room itself and layout and all of those other issues, if you can't be clear why the meeting is being held or why a particular item is being on that agenda, then and you don't communicate that to the right people, the chances are the wrong people will turn up. There will be a spurious conversation and dialogue which will be deferred till next time so that people can go away and think about it more carefully. Of course, there is the third outcome, and that is that people make hasty, poor decisions which are then unpicked at the next meeting, so you still make very little progress. So that brings me to the issue of agendas, and on the screen now you will see an example of the default agenda which I continue to see in organisations inside and outside the public sector, in the UK and on my business travels abroad. Yes, the items are made up. What you see on screen I've not lifted from one particular meeting, but I would be astonished if you didn't look at that list and think, I've been to meetings like that. So what's wrong with that agenda? I know I've only got a few minutes in this presentation, but let's rattle through some of the major problems. Well, the first thing to say is that the first three items on that agenda don't actually move any business forward at all. They are going through the motions. Apologies? Why do we need to know who's not there? Why do we need to take time up in the meeting being told by the secretary or the chairperson of the meeting that so-and-so or such and such couldn't make it today? Going through the minutes of the meeting, page by page, the last meeting, page by page, item by item, waiting for somebody to call out in a rather pedantic way, sorry, there's a typo on page 3, or such and such said this, not that. for goodness sake, that should be done when the minutes came out, not waiting until the start of the following meeting. And matters arising from the minutes, which is a common item, why is that there? All it's doing is giving the opportunity for people to reopen discussions that were nailed down at the last meeting. So not only does those 3 items waste time, but they actually reward people arriving late, because they know there is nothing of any consequence that's going to go on for the first 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes. I did actually once observe a health board meeting in Wales where matters arising finished 45 minutes after the meeting had started. So it took 45 minutes to get through the first 3 items. Is it any wonder that busy clinicians, and other health professionals for that matter, made the judgment call that I'll either skip the meeting altogether or I'll arrive when I've finished what I was doing before. I'm not going to rush, because nothing of any consequence will happen in that first few minutes. If you then look at the other items in the middle of that agenda, you will see that they are one-liners. They are 2-word or 3-word phrases. They don't communicate clarity of purpose. There's no supporting information. There's no explanation as to why those items are on the agenda or what I'm expected to do in preparation for the meeting. And I've already talked about those issues before. You'll also see that some of the more crunchy issues are actually right at the bottom of the agenda, just at the time that people are beginning to lose the will to live or are shuffling their papers and wanting to get out of the room. Now, if you're going to put a contentious item late on the agenda in order to rush it through, then shame on you. But more often than not, these agendas are just lazily put together. They may even be a standard template so that the meeting items are the same month after month after month. But if you put a contentious issue on at the end, you will either get a deferral to next time, or you will get a hasty, bad decision. And the final piece of mess or problem with this sort of agenda is that ubiquitous item, any other business. I have no idea how anybody can plan and manage a meeting if you are going to add at the end of the meeting an opportunity for people to ambush it with all sorts of personal agendas. Take it off the agenda. If people have an issue that they need to raise, it should either be on the agenda in its own right, or they should announce it at the start, so that you are then, if you're in charge of the meeting, you are then able to modify the remainder of the session to incorporate those urgent items. To wait until everybody's almost out of the door to start opening it up for anything and everything people can think of it's a problem with the agenda, but it's also an example of poor chairmanship. So if that agenda is so bad, and for the moment you need to take my word for it, that agenda style is responsible for the vast majority of poor meetings, then what can I do instead? Well, on the next slide, you see an alternative agenda design. Don't be deceived by its simplicity. It's actually an incredibly powerful way of re-educating both the people who write items for the agenda, but also the people who come along to the meeting. And you'll see that the first section in this new agenda is items we need to make a decision on today, or bad things will happen. And by putting it first, you set a business-like tone. So all the issues where everybody needs to be in the room on time in order to make some crunchy decisions, those issues are first. On its own, that can, over time, get rid of the disease of late arrivals. It makes it quite clear that if you're not there on time, we're going to get down to business, and we are not going to reopen these issues when you appear 30, 40 minutes after the start of the meeting. The second piece of re-education that it does is it invites the people who are bringing items to the meeting to do some thinking about what is it they actually want. And you'll see on screen an example of an item which has now been so precisely described that you can be in absolutely no doubt what it is you're being asked to do at that meeting. So you can prepare, send somebody else if you're not the right person, or just back out altogether because it's not the best use of your time. So the meeting starts with as many or as few items for decision as are relevant to your meeting and its purpose. The second section, items which we need to talk about today, so bounce some ideas around, but we're not under time pressures to make a critical decision just yet. And those are quite important issues because my experience is that when people are released from the pressure of having to make a decision right now, they tend to engage in far more open dialogue than if they are always aware that in a minute we're going to have to decide on this issue. So there may well be 3 or 4 items in that section of the meeting which are, let's get everybody's opinions, let's make some tentative decisions about who's going to work on these and bring them back to a future meeting for our decision. And you'll see the final classification are those items which are just for information. I'm not saying they're unimportant, but if we were to run out of time at the meeting, they are items that people can follow up with the individuals direct. We don't need to know in a meeting that there's a car park closure between the 5th and the 10th of March. And yet under the old agenda, that would be put on the agenda for the meeting and somebody would take 1 or 2 minutes to talk about that. And if the meeting was badly chaired, everybody would pile in about the problems of car parking on the hospital or on the clinic site. When is somebody going to do something about it? All very entertaining stuff, a complete waste of the time of everybody who's coming along. So we change our old agenda into that 3-part agenda. Items for decision, items for discussion, items for information only. The people bringing items are trained now to be more clear, to be articulating what it is they want from that item so that the chairman knows which part of the meeting to slot it into. The members coming along have got no excuse for saying on the day, oh, I didn't know that's what we were going to talk about. I have to go back to my colleagues. And I have found that people who run this sort of agenda typically find their meetings are more productive and they finish earlier. They have a precision and a clarity which makes them easier to run, and most people come in with a more business-like mindset. They know why they're there, they get straight to it, they do the business, and then they go on with the rest of their day. If you accept that that agenda might be a better way of proceeding, then you will find that the meetings are much easier to chair. Remember the old agenda? I'll put it back up on the screen again now. The old agenda, quite a lot of time would have been spent trying to work out what the item was all about. And if I came with a different idea as to what rotas meant than you did, the job of the chair of the meeting would be to try and reconcile our different interpretations. And that's before we got down to actually talking about why the item was on the agenda. So you can see that if you have more clarity, the chairman can simply just say, item 3, new department, structural alterations, proposal from so and so. Right, what do we think about that? You can get straight down to business with that agenda. So, some other hints and tips on chairing effective meetings. First of all, get an agenda like the one I've proposed, and then the meeting will become much easier to chair. On screen, you'll see another set of hints and tips for chairing effective meetings, and there are a few obvious and courteous ones. Start on time. I continue to be invited to meetings within the public sector where the people running the meeting are often the last ones into the room. Not only is that incredibly discourteous to the people who did arrive on time, it actually promotes those same people being late next time. Because why should we turn up for a meeting that doesn't even start until 10 past, quarter past, 20 past? Start on time. Even if there's only 6 people out of 11 in the room, start on time. Second, that I'm going to pick from that list is make sure that you are the last to speak on issues because there's a real danger for many chairs of meetings that they want to try and put their point of view first in order to help place the item into context or to give the background or whatever it might be. They're trying to be helpful, but what tends to happen is that their motives are often questioned by the rest of the people there, who are left with the distinct impression that it's already a done deal. What's the point in us being there? Because the chairman of the meeting has already said what he or she is after. If the item that you're talking about is so close to your professional or personal heart, then the best thing to do is to step back from chairing either that item or that whole meeting and asking somebody else to do it. Make that decision open and let the rest of the meeting attendees know what's going on so that they don't doubt your motives. But step back. I'm too close to this issue. I want to engage fully in the discussion. Therefore, it would be an abuse of my position in the chair for me to try and do both. More often than not, your colleagues will say, no, it's all right, Fred, you don't need to do that. But you will have made the offer. And it's less likely that your motives will be challenged. If you do have minutes of meetings, and there are so many meetings that don't actually need formal minutes anyway, but if you are going to have minutes, make sure that they are action notes, that the clarity as to who's going to do what, when, and how is included in the minutes. We really don't need nowadays the old style minutes of Mrs. So-and-so remarked on this and Councillor such and such supported her and it was recommended and it was seconded and proposed and carried unanimously. Unless you are running a statutory body which has to put its minutes in the public record, you do not need those sorts of minutes. So make sure when you're chairing a meeting, you concentrate on saying, right, are we agreed? So-and-so is going to do this. By then, that'll be in the notes. Let's move on to the next item. Again, the more businesslike you can be, the more likely it is that people will come along to your meetings because they realise they are a good use of time rather than just 2 hours of their life they're never going to get back again. The final thing to say about chairing a meeting is don't be afraid to be creative. I don't know where it's written down in any manual that boards have to meet round a boardroom table and sit there without moving and that only one person can speak at a time and everything has to go through the chair. Where's that come from? If you think that a particular item on a meeting that you're chairing would be best dealt with by people forming themselves into pairs or trios for 10 minutes, sticking post-it notes on the wall or whatever it might be, do it. You're not breaking any rules. In fact, if you do have small groups working on an issue for 5 or 10 minutes, you will get 3, 4, 5 times as much input to the discussion as if you simply wait for the convention of I speak, then I ask somebody else to speak, and somebody at the bottom of the table speaks, and then it comes back to me again. Again, don't do this as a social experiment. You must let people know why you are doing what you are doing, but be prepared to be creative. Meetings do not have to take place with people sipping tea or water in a U-shape, in a boardroom shape, in a seminar room shape. You can do what you want if you know what the meeting is there to do. So, to summarise, if the meeting hasn't got a clear purpose, don't hold it. If it doesn't have enough likelihood of doing business to warrant the time and effort and cost of people being there, cancel it. Or at least check with a few people how they would feel if it were postponed. Once you've decided that the meeting is going to go ahead, make sure you have absolute clarity on its purpose, both the whole meeting and the individual items if it's a multi-agenda meeting. Communicate that agenda, and I'm going to suggest you use my new agenda rather than the old style one, and let people know that you are going to get down to business the minute people get into the room. Chair the meeting in the way that my hints and tips on that previous slide show you, and you will tend to be thanked for the way that you run meetings. Nobody's ever going to love meetings. for many of you, they will be distractions from the things that you train to do and you want to spend your time doing. But you are likely prepared to give somebody the time of day for a meeting if it looks as if they are going to run it crisply, professionally, with a clear purpose and a clear outcome. They in turn are likely to come to your meetings if you do the same. If, on the other hand, you're simply going to run your meetings like the Vicar of Dibley Parish Council with that old style agenda, then don't be surprised if people turn up late, leave early, cause mischief in the middle, and end up not coming to your meetings in future because they are a waste of time. So I wish you well with your future meetings, and thank you for watching this video.